A very warm welcome to the Leaders of Tomorrow Vodcast, your go-to series for unfiltered conversations with entrepreneurs shaping the future of business. I'm Ritwika Gupta. Now, men's fashion rarely gets the spotlight, but Bombay Shirt Company is changing that. India's first online custom-made shirt brand lets you design everything from fabric to buttons, cuffs to monogram, while AI ensures the perfect fit. In conversation today with Akshay Narvekar and Chippy Mehta, the visionaries behind Bombay Shirt Company. Akshay, Chippy, welcome to the Leaders of Tomorrow Vodcast. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So first things first, Akshay, I want to come to you. Bombay Shirt Company, whenever I think of the name Bombay, it invokes a sense of, nostalgia, old world charm. How do you associate with Bombay? I mean, is it because you are from Bombay? That's how the name came about. What does it symbolize for you beyond shirts?
Yeah, various cues. I think when we were thinking about the name for the company, of course, being from here, it's an ode to both my heritage as well as the heritage of tailoring, of craft, all of that. Bombay, while has a colonial past, obviously, but also a modern, fast-paced city.
Yeah.
So I think the brand also in some ways represents, old world tailoring as well as modern silhouettes, fabrics, cuts, etc. And so that I felt that was a play worth taking note of. I think ultimately when it came down to the name itself, I was very clear I wanted a name that would stand the test of time. So something that would be timeless, something that has relevance not just today, but let's say 100 years from now, if the company is still around, hopefully. And so I think just a simple name like Bombay Shirt Company just made a lot of sense. I didn't have any alternates. That was literally the first name I thought of and the name that stuck.
Fantastic.
So the company is actually called something else. It's registered under Tomorrowland Apparels. Maybe you should ask him why Tomorrowland.
Tomorrowland.
No, it's just we needed a company name and we tried many options, didn't work. We were going for a music festival and threw the name out there, it stuck, and that's just been the official name.
So what happens in Tomorrowland doesn't stay in Tomorrowland after all. It becomes a company name. Chippy, you joined the company in 2021. Tell me what drew you to this business, and you come from a background of textiles and apparel, so tell us more.
Yeah, so apart from Akshay forcing me, just kidding. I think this was a very interesting space because being in the apparel industry for so many years, 20 plus years, typically in the back end, I was always curious as to, what brands were and how brands were growing in the country in the whole D2C area. I had myself run a couple of brands, home furnishing as women's wear as well. But what actually drew me to Bombay Shirt was the unique offering of being able to customize at scale, personalize at scale. I felt the country was really ready for this, and there was nobody really doing this as well as Bombay Shirt and Akshay was. So when we both had a very casual offline conversation about the D2C space. I think one thing led to another, and we're both excited about joining hands.
Akshay, when you started the company, it was at a time when, I would say it was very easy for someone to just walk into a mall or to a store, and to just pick up fashion off the racks, right? Of course, in the smaller towns, tailoring and, it's always been there. But I'm talking about the metros, where convenience is everything. How were you convinced that, customization would change that behavior?
Look, I don't think we were changing customer behavior per se, because tailoring has always been a large part of apparel buying, especially in the menswear space. I just thought that there was a different, more consistent customer journey that we could wrap this all around. Obviously, brand aside, just a tech-focused, service-led, consistent process. And I thought that's really where the opportunity was. Of course, it helped that I myself was a customer for the service, and I was able to see a lot of gaps in my own experiences, which I basically wanted to fix. And so, like I said, I don't think I was changing customer behavior. While we changed distribution channels, we started online first, and only because I thought that was the cheap way to go. Hindsight would tell me differently, but Yeah, I think it was just packaging it differently. And so I always felt there was an opportunity. The market's obviously very large. And so, even if we could occupy a tiny space of that market, we could build a potentially very large business.
Right. Chippy, coming to you, when we think of fashion, it appears to be very glamorous on the outside, on magazine covers, on Instagram, on television, but it is not as glamorous because you're dealing with, inventory, you're dealing with supply chains, operations, returns. Tell me, what is the least glamorous side about being in the business of fashion today?
I wouldn't necessarily call it least glamorous, but there are a lot of operational challenges that one faces, especially running supply chain or retail for that matter, in India, right? I think one of the reasons why maybe my hair is never going to grow back is because running retail and a supply chain in India has its own set of complexities. So yes, the Insta life is fairly different from what goes on at the back end. In fact, interestingly enough, 6 months after me coming on board, I still remember this, and I'm sure Akshay does too, we had to actually stop all marketing across all our channels for almost 3 weeks because our supply chain had crashed. And this was literally 6 months after me joining in, and I didn't know who to look at, where to go. So there are a lot of dependencies, especially on the front end, on labor, etc., to get that right. But I think, touch wood, we've been really at it with fairly good rigor over the last so many years, where we've had good consistent growth. But I think more importantly, been able to manage both the front and back end through that growth, standardize processes, build the company up, like a pyramid with good structure and SOPs in place. So we are a little bit less dependent now on, touch and feel, and more on our typical muscle that we have built out over the years, and both on the front end as well as the back end.
Which brings me to my next question to you. You operate across online and offline both, right? What are some of the misconceptions, about omnichannel businesses, that maybe young founders need to perhaps know before they get into it?
I think my biggest call out would be the customer isn't necessarily the same. I don't think India today, and this might be a little contrarian view, but I don't think India today still has enough of consumers who are transacting in an omnichannel way. So there are customers like you or me who might be buying certain products online and consuming certain products offline, but we don't necessarily consume them and the same brand especially across both channels. So I think today I would say that to a lot of young founders, saying even though the direction is very clear and omnichannel is the future, it's not something that is just in trend, and one has to gear up and structure their companies so that they could manage both verticals. But as we are today, I think there is still a consumer that is participating in both channels fairly exclusively.
Sure. Akshay, I also want to know your take on India's retail market. How have you seen it evolve, over the last 14 years or so?
Well, on multiple fronts. I think, when it comes to brands themselves, I think customers are receptive now, in fact, proud of consuming homegrown D2C brands, which wasn't necessarily the case when we started. Back then we had to prove to customers why we deserve to be in the playing field. It took a lot of effort to actually convince people to change over. I think that's become a lot easier. People understand now that given our obsession as founders with product, being much closer to manufacturing in many cases, etc., we're giving them equal, if not better, more compelling product than even international peers. So I think that has definitely been a change. I think customers' propensity to spend has definitely gone up as well. I think just consumption as an overall function of GDP has gone up. I think for better or for worse, people save less than they used to, which just means there's more disposable income for brands like us, which is another macro trend I think that plays in our favor. I think also customers are a lot more aware and much more savvy than they once were with social media, understanding exactly what makes a good product, what is just marketing versus what is substance. I think people are a lot more aware of that now. And so, nobody can fool the customer at all. So I think it's just a much more evolved landscape than it was when we started 14 years ago. But I think for the better, both for brands, for consumers, and just the entire ecosystem.
All right, so let's stay on the D2C space, and I want to come to you, Chippy. There have been so many brands that have come up in the D2C sector, like, you know, over the last 5-7 years. You know, do you see this segment having a long run, or do you think it has been overhyped in the last couple of years or so?
No, not at all. I think there's a very bright future ahead of us. I think, kind of continuing to what Akshay said, right? I think the evolution of the consumer in terms of their awareness, in terms of their exposure to brands, where maybe 10 years and 20 years ago, you were bound to only the legacy players. They were the only ones being able to serve the consumer and reach the consumer for that matter. I think with the D2C, evolution and the way it's taken place, with the kind of funding that's come in, and the exposure that a customer has today, I think D2C is definitely here, not only here to stay, but is also here to disrupt.
Sure. Akshay, do you think homegrown brands from India have the potential to compete with global brands in terms of quality or, in fact, even aspirational value?
Absolutely. Like I said, ultimately, it comes down to the founder and their obsession with the product. Right? That's a level playing field, regardless of where you're situated geographically. If you're obsessed with something, you'll find the solutions to the customer's problems. Like I said, in many cases, especially in physical goods, manufacturing is situated a lot closer here than it is to many of your Western brands, which means you have just a better understanding of your product because you're probably visiting manufacturing, visiting your factories, just have a much more closer control over the quality that eventually goes out. The last bit that you touched upon, I think, is really the differentiator, is our ability now to story tell and educate people about why this product fits into their lifestyle, or why it's a better product than, let's say, somebody else is offering. And I think, like I said, Indians have gotten a lot more savvy with that. In terms of social media, brand storytelling, all of that, I think we're just a lot more evolved than we once were. So in this landscape, I don't see why we can't compete and be at the forefront of D2C across the world.
Why I also ask that is because I think building a premium brand in India, it's also kind of like a double-edged sword, because while consumers, they are aspirational, but they're also highly price conscious. So how do you balance both realities?
So in our case, I don't think we ever intended to be a premium product. I don't think that was the goal when we initially started off. I think in the early days, the idea was to actually be a democratic product where we offered a custom-made offering, but at the same price as ready-to-wear competitors, which we did. Over time, I think customers' requirements of what the product is just evolved to being a lot more discerning, which meant that everything that goes into making a good product becomes a lot more expensive because all the details have to be taken care of, which then ultimately translates into a certain price for the product, which today you could argue is no longer obviously mass by any means. It's more on the aspirational to luxury end. But I think that's just more an outcome of what customers demanded than us trying to find a niche in the market and trying to fit it. I think it's just been a sort of evolution over time. But yes, is it difficult to compete? Of course, because at that end of the market, you are competing with international brands, with legacy brands. And so you really have to be on point in terms of your offering, as well as the storytelling and the service that goes around it. Makes it harder, but I think there's a real price to be won if you can do it well.
Right.
I always stick with I've always believed that the Indian consumer is not price conscious, they're actually value conscious. And as long as they see value in your product, so it has to be priced correctly based on that. So I think as long as Akshay is saying that your product needs to demand that price, right? So I think whether it's a 100,000 rupee, let's say, piece of furniture, or a 10,000 rupee shirt, or it could be a 50 lakh rupee car, I think it has to derive value to the consumer.
I agree. So who do you see as competition in this space?
I think a bunch of international brands. I'm not going to name them necessarily. I'm happy to, but there's a bunch of international brands. There are a couple of domestic legacy brands as well. But I think, more than brands, it's more about, allowing the customer to have access, giving the customer access to a custom-made, made-to-measure product, and breaking that barrier for them is the competition. It's like the ready-made shirt is, in some sense, our competition and our opportunity.
I think, he'll tell you this, but I've never really been focused on individual competitors or brands around us.
Okay.
I think the market is massive. And this is not me being democratic. This is genuinely how I feel. I think the market is massive. I theoretically look at anyone selling, and taking share of men's wardrobe as being competition. I'd like everyone to wear, us from head to toe now that we offer everything. But I'd rather focus on ourselves, to be honest. I think ultimately, if we do right by our product, our customers, etc., we'll own a much larger share of their wardrobe. And I think that's really, one thing to focus on. There are millions of competitors out there. If we actually try to analyze what every one of them is doing, I think that won't be the best use of our time. So rather just focus on ourselves and make sure we're doing the best and being the best we can be.
So you both have been in the business of fashion and apparel for a while now. How would you rate each other's sense of style and fashion?
I don't think I like his. I don't think he likes mine. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I'm pretty clean, classy, straightforward, solid colors, a little bit of checks and stripes, sure, but well-fitted clothes that make me feel comfortable, confident. I am not as experimental as he is, but that's my sense of style.
Do you agree?
I think so. I think what he has going for him is its consistency. So ever since I've known him, and it's been 20 plus years, he's always had a particular style, and he's stuck by it despite trends changing over the years. He's been very clear about how he dresses. I think there's something to be said for that, honestly. If someone can stay true to their take on on fashion. I don't not like his style. I think he's being harsh on himself there. It's just different from mine. Like I said, maybe I'm a little bit more out there than he is. But ultimately, I think the broad fundamentals of how we look at fashion, look at clothing, is very similar. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here working together.
Yeah, and actually, my objective of asking this to you is also because men's fashion, it is not so much in the mainstream as women's fashion, of course. So do people come to you, for what should I, pair this up with that, so for some tips and everything, since you're running a shirt company and there's so much you can do. What are the common questions, the fun questions do you get from?
I think we have a combination of customers. We have customers who come in and know exactly what they want. They're the kind of discerning customer who says, hey, listen, I want my collar this size, I want my pocket exactly like this is where I want my monogram, this is how I like my cuffs, my plackets, etc. Right? This is the fit that I want. So they're very clear. And we also have the other extreme where customers literally are coming in blindfolded saying, I need a makeover, I'm not happy with what I am, or my wife's not happy with my clothes. So they would probably come with their wife or their girlfriend and be like, listen, I need a whole new wardrobe. And they kind of, leave it to us, right? We have stylists across all our 35 stores that are well trained and understand fits, design, personalities also, in order to kind of really cater to the customer's next set of wardrobe change.
I think we're less focused on fashion. We don't really consider ourselves a fashion company. I think it's more a contemporary take on classic silhouettes for men. So you're not necessarily coming to us for the latest and greatest in terms of street fashion or anything like that. It may be just evolution in terms of silhouettes or fabrics or tiny details on what we consider to be classic menswear.
Sure.
And so that's why you'd come to us. But for the reasons that he said, whether it's someone who has no idea about how they should dress and they're leaving it all up to us, or for the person on the other end of the spectrum who's very, very particular and knows he can get the details from us, and everywhere in between, you'll find customers across the continuum.
Right. No conversation today is complete without the mention of AI and technology because it's impacting everyday industries. And I want to know from you, Chippy, in terms of how do you see technology really impacting the retail industry, especially because you are in the business of, customization, personalization. How do you think this is going to shape up in the next few years as well?
Hey, things are moving really fast, right? I mean, take it from our own personal lives with the amount, what we knew about ChatGPT and Claude maybe 8, 9 months, 10 months ago to what we are and how we use it today, right? And I'm talking about us, I'm even talking about my children today, right? They're using it every single day. And that ultimately has to, of course, come into business and we use it at an enterprise scale. So I think we are very, very clear about the way forward. AI is not our product, AI is not what we are selling. AI just allows us to optimize and to better serve the customer. Now, what that means, for different brands, it would mean different things. But for us, I can tell you, starting from our supply chain all the way to our customer, market research, to our retail operations. For example, in retail operations, we monitor every single one of our stores through cameras, through AI, telling us everything that we're doing right and wrong, right? So apart from just suggesting stuff to our customers, it's about actually seeing from our own operational piece as to where the gaps could be, whether it's at the beginning, whether it's in the middle, whether it's the styling, whether it's the whole fit process, or it's, whether it's manning the store. I mean, today I have AI telling me every single week of how my roster across 35 stores is working based on peak hours, based on weekdays, weekends, based on customer profile, how many people do you need at the store at a particular time, and therefore roster. So AI is in our lives all through now, and I think it's up to us and as to how we are able to use it and accelerate our own operations to an extent that it ultimately impacts the consumer for good.
I think the mandate's also very clear internally. Every single department within the company can and should use AI to leverage what they do, whether it's just to do things more efficiently, whether it's to optimize on cost. There are a variety of use cases for why you would use AI. I think, like I said, our mandate is for everyone to figure out internally how it's going to benefit them. From a top-down approach, we're going to give them all the resources that they require to be able to do that. But ultimately, it's up to them to figure it out. We can guide them on what we think works and doesn't work for them. But it's all pervasive. Like he said, it started very quickly. Over the last, I'd say, 3 months, to the extent to which we use it as a company is night and day, and it's just the beginning. So, yeah.
Just speaking of technology, there's something else I want to talk to you guys about, and I want to ask this to both of you. Here you are building a thoughtful brand, and then you have quick commerce promising fashion in 15 minutes.
Short answers, I don't see it happening for us anytime soon. I think we're very particular, very considerate about the channels that we choose. So for example, today we're only in our own 35 stores as well as our own website. So we're not on marketplaces, we're not in shop-in-shops. While we could be there and potentially it's all accretive revenue, we've chosen not to do it because we're very particular about the experience that we offer to our customers. Us controlling that experience and the narrative is very important. Is there a quick buck to be made through Q-commerce and etc. and other channels? Sure, I don't think we'd compromise that. Even from a brand perspective, I think it's very important to be accessible but not overly accessible as well, given the positioning that we play in. It's surprising, we had a conversation just last week internally about this. There were some suggestions being thrown at us to potentially look at other channels.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to say that unanimously, internally, we were very, very clear about the way we see things. But Chippy, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, no, I have a similar viewpoint. It's not for us. It's not for our brand. It's not for what we offer. That said, I think fashion, whether fashion has a place in quick commerce, I think it does. But there are types of fashion, and I think fast fashion, slightly lower priced fashion, etc. Might find a little bit more joy, through that channel. I don't believe that today it is for us.
Sure. Akshay, if you were to start Bombay Shirt Company in 2026 in an era of AI, quick commerce, customers changing preferences every now and then, how would you do it differently?
I don't know if I would do it again. If I knew everything I knew now, back then I probably wouldn't have started it. But jokes aside, I think the big difference today is that entry barriers are almost zero. I mean, time to market, ability to market, cost to market, the marginal cost is almost zero. Everyone has the same tools at their disposal, which then begs the question on how are you really going to be different going forward, right? I think that's the question one has to ask themselves, whether it's fashion or any other industry for that matter. Tough. I mean, it's very, very tough. I think also the market has become a lot more fragmented. Earlier, legacy brands occupied a large share of everyone's wallet. Today, it's dispersed across multiple brands, right? People don't want to go to the same brand again and again for the same things, or would like to have sort of niches for various products within, their larger buying patterns. All this makes life very, very hard going forward. So, my view is unless you have a really compelling proposition for why your product is different or why your go-to-market or your price is very different from the competition, I think it's easy to get to a certain point in terms of scale, but from there on, it's going to be very hard. So it's really interesting to see how business models for brands are going to evolve, in the coming years. Personally, I don't have a solution or an answer yet. I think about it a lot. I don't I don't see the differentiator yet. So I don't know in 2026 whether I would do this again, all jokes aside, yeah.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, because a lot of the founders whom I speak to, I feel like there's this sense of urgency to, like, you know, scale aggressively, grow fast. How do you view this, you know, startup, you know, culture today, you know, but because you have consciously chosen slow growth because I think you wanted to protect your brand and your identity, right? How do you view this, you know, culture of aggressively growing and scaling?
It comes back to your first question about the name, right? When we came up with the name, it was to have something timeless that could potentially last 100 years, which is how we look at the brand and the company, right? If you're going to last 100 years, you're probably not going to grow aggressively and then burn out over time for lack of funding. You're going to try and do it at a sustained pace. That's not to say that we make profits from day one or anything like that, but it's very considered. Every decision is considered. There's a thought behind it. Are there brands that potentially grow faster than us? Of course. Are we okay with that? I'm perfectly fine with that. Ultimately, I think the true test is in how consumers think about us, or, you know, how consumers repeat with us, what is the real love for the brand. I think if all these metrics that we track very, very closely are in line and are constantly getting better over the course of time, this brand will be there at the very end. So not necessarily the answer that investors look for, but we're building this brand for ourselves, for our customers, and I think eventually the path that we've chosen will pay off. I'm very certain of that.
Right. So what would your advice be, you know, to an entrepreneur, you know, who wants to, you know, enter this space? What are the 2-3 things you'd like to tell him or her?
I mean, I'd give you the generic answer first, which is just think customer, right? I think everything revolves around that. All of your marketing strategies, all of your operations, be it front end or back end, everything works. Your product as well, right? It all depends on what your customer's looking for. So I think as long as a new age entrepreneur today understands who his or her customer is, what they're looking for, and whether you are in a position to serve them, is what I would look at. And that's the one piece of advice I'd always give somebody. I think that's something that I ask my teams and ask myself this every single day, is that what better can we do? Because ultimately your business is running on customer love.
Right.
Yeah, the answer I'd give you is product. I've said this consistently. Ultimately, if you really care about the product, as an entrepreneur, you're going to go through ups and downs constantly. There are going to be challenges, especially if you're in it for the long run. There are going to be challenges and issues cropping up. But if you really love the product or the service that you're solving for, you'll keep going. And ultimately, coming back to the age of AI, where business models are changing, where people's right to win is unclear given the level playing field on everything else, meaning distribution, meaning technology, meaning potentially supply chain, then what really is your differentiator? It comes down to you having an obsession for your product or having an insight about the product or the service that nobody else has. That's what's going to make you win. So ultimately, that's what I would focus on. If there's someone with a really good idea or really good differentiator in terms of the product, you potentially have a chance. But do it because you love it, because it's a long journey.
But what's more difficult, building a business or building a life around the business without losing yourself in it, like losing control of all the other factors?
I think regardless of anything, you will always somehow, somewhere lose yourself through the whole journey, right? And you got to keep finding yourself back. I'm sure Akshay has a lot to say on that, but yes, it's always a tough and a long road. So I think re-energizing and refocusing is something that you just got to keep rinsing and repeating in every now and then, every phase.
Sure.
Yeah, so I actually stepped down from the CEO role after 14 years, just 6 months ago. The early years were tough, building a business in a category that didn't really exist. I would say, hard product, given the premise is customization at scale, and there was an element of burnout for sure. I think towards the latter half, I started to realize that there's no work-life balance. It's just honestly a mix of both. You have to integrate work into your life and vice versa. But if you truly care about what you do, that you will spend the hours. You're not going to build something of any meaning if you didn't. And I think it really comes down honestly to the individual and what they want from every stage in their life. I had reached a stage in my life where, like I said, having done this for 14 years, doing it day in and day out, to that level of granularity became very hard. I think there are folks like Chippy who are much better suited to now scaling the day-to-day well past we are into the future, and I'm supporting in all the ways that I can. But I think it's a personal decision. It's a very personal, everyone has their own factors that, associate with the final decision. So.
Fantastic. Well, I think we had a fantastic conversation, but before I let you go, one last question. Hypothetically, if Bombay Shirt Company did not exist, what would you be doing today? Let's start with you, Chippy.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Okay. I haven't had time to think about that because of my work-life balance. But I think apart from maybe probably just sitting on a beach, no, I'm very obsessed. So I used to be an ex-professional tennis player, so an ex-athlete. So I'm very obsessed with health. And I think he knows this. We've just both done our annual checkups, and we both had excellent results.
Fantastic.
Which really drives me. Every morning, getting a little bit of yoga, or gym, and healthy breakfast, living a kind of a healthy lifestyle in some sense is something I'm quite obsessed with, and maybe would start something to do in the whole wellness, something to do with it within the wellness industry is what I would pick.
Amazing.
I think I realized very early in my career that I'm not cut out to work in a traditional hierarchical corporate setup. I think they'll tell you that. Yeah, just too opinionated and strong-minded to do that. So while that's how I did start my career, I realized very quickly that whatever I did going forward would have to be started by me or conceptualized by me at least, because that's the only way I know how to live and work. So if I wasn't doing this, it would be another business in some D2C space, I assume. But yeah, probably been an entrepreneur for sure.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was a lovely conversation, and looking forward to chatting with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Before we wrap up today's episode, here's a quick look at our LOT cheat sheet, a quick rundown of the top takeaways from today's episode. And that's a wrap for today's episode of the Leaders of Tomorrow Vodcast. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations and keep chasing those big dreams. Until next time, this is Ritwika Gupta signing off.